Jumbo fam, and Aquaba. Welcome to Espresso Talk Today. I'm Amma Robin, your host and guide, and today I have a story to share with you. Here at Espresso Talk Today, we navigate the chaos of living Black in predominantly white spaces. We seek understanding, strength, and calm in the midst of it all. This story is a journey into history, imagination, and connection. It's about a roundtable discussion, an imagined gathering with great Black figures from history, and me. I've long dreamed of sitting with them, listening to their wisdom, and learning from their experiences. What would it be like to share a meal with Frederick Douglass, or exchange ideas with Ida B. Wells, or to hear directly from Dr. Carter G. Woodson about why Black history must be reclaimed? But this is also a story about what's left out, what we are not taught, and the consequences of that erasure. It's a story about the boy who had never heard of any Black inventors, and what that absence of knowledge does to a child's sense of possibility. It's a story about how reading and learning can bring us closer to the past and give us tools to shape the future. This is a story of honoring our ancestors, learning from their legacies, and making space at the table for those shaping history today. And speaking of today, we will begin with a short libation ceremony. This is a ritual deeply rooted in African and Black traditions. Libations are poured to honor our ancestors, to remember those who came before us, and to connect with the wisdom they left behind. Okay, if you have some water, some tea, coffee, my personal favorite, take a moment and lift it in gratitude. Asante Sana, thank you. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and if you're feeling this show, then share it with your fam, your crew, your circle, everyone in your community, and tell them to meet me at espressotalktoday.com or on Instagram at Amma Robin L. That's AMA _ ROBIN _ the letter L. Now let's take a deep breath together, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Nice. Let's begin. A seat at the table. The workshop smelled of sawdust and oil, the hum of machinery filling the space. But as I stepped through the door, it transformed. The sawdust faded, replaced by the soft murmur of voices and the energy of something powerful and timeless. It was the power of history itself. Before me was a large round table, wooden and surrounded by figures whose names I had studied, admired, and dreamed of meeting. I wasn't just stepping into a room, I was stepping into a dream. This was my dream. Garrett Morgan was the first to notice me. He adjusted his goggles and gave a nod, gesturing to the chair beside him. "Welcome," he said. "We've been expecting you." The table stretched endlessly, filled with voices from across time. The great orator and abolitionist Frederick Douglass sat upright, his gaze intense but warm, while the teacher and investigative journalist Ida B. Wells leaned slightly forward, her notebook open, her pen poised as if ready to document everything. On the other side of the table, singer and activist Nina Simone tapped her fingers rhythmically, humming a melody under her breath. Then I saw Joseph Rainey the first black man to serve in the House of Representatives. He adjusted his coat, his presence dignified and steady. Writer and poet Langston Hughes leaned back, a twinkle in his eye, and next to him, the scholar and writer, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, sat in quiet contemplation, his fingers steepled in thought. And there, at the head of the table, sat the father of Black History Month, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, his presence commanding yet approachable. Dr. Woodson was the first to speak. "Do you know why we're here?" he asked, his voice steady but full of urgency. When I hesitated to answer, he spoke up. "It's because of Black History Month. Black History Month was never meant to be the end of the conversation. It was meant to be the beginning, a time to reclaim our narratives, to correct the lies that have been told about us, correct the lies that have been told to us. This is why I wrote The Miseducation of the Negro in 1933, to correct the lies that we have believed in our own community, that we have taught to our children, and what they've taught to their children. We have been miseducated in our history, our contributions, and even our self-worth and our humanity. We have been taught that we did nothing, contributed nothing, and that we are nothing." He looked around the table, his gaze resting on each figure sitting there. "Our history has been erased, distorted, stolen. I started this work so that we could tell the truth, know our self-worth." Garrett Morgan, who I remembered as a great inventor of the 3-light traffic signal, nodded in agreement. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked, gesturing to the table. "How much we've done, how much we've endured. And yet most people have no idea that it was us who built so much of this country, despite all the hatred and the violence and the unrelenting racism and oppression here. They've erased us. They've erased our work and contributions, and they've erased the threats and terrible violence that we faced." Ida B. Wells paused for a moment. "They've even erased their own history of lynching Black people and destroying Black communities and towns. It's a cover-up of their evil actions against us," said Ida B. Wells, her voice sharp and clear. "But that's why we're here. That's why we're telling our stories." I nodded, feeling the weight of their words. It was heavy. "I was once speaking to a young Black student," I said. "He was about 12 years old, and I asked him if he knew about any Black inventors. And he looked at me like I was crazy and said no. He said there haven't been any Black inventors, maybe a few Black scientists, but no Black inventors." He was so certain, and I realized that it wasn't his fault. He had been taught nothing about our stories, about our history. "What did you do?" Frederick Douglass asked, his voice deep and commanding. "I told him about Garrett Morgan," I said, glancing at Garrett at the table, "about Madam C.J. Walker, who invented Black hair care products, and I told him about so many others whose names he had never heard of." His face lit up with pride. I saw him standing taller. Later, he told me that his friends didn't believe him. His Black friends were skeptical. His white friends called him a liar. They all thought that this couldn't be true. They had only ever heard about white inventors, white leaders, and white achievements. "They don't know our history," said Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, his voice calm with meaning, "and many of them don't care to know. But I think more accurately, it's the double consciousness that I discussed in The Souls of Black Folk. Quoting from his legendary book, he reads, "It's his double consciousness. One ever feels his two-ness. An American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body." Closing the book, Dr. Du Bois said, "But these two sides are not given equal value. One is cherished and celebrated, the other is scorned and degraded." Dr. Woodson leaned forward, his hands clasped at the table. "That is why we have to keep teaching. The purpose of Black History Month is not to appease or celebrate for 28 days. It's to educate, to remind us and to remind them that we are not a negligible factor, that our contributions and work are woven into the very fabric of this nation." Congressman Joseph Rainey nodded. We all understood the importance of Black history. We knew that if we didn't control the narrative, we would be reduced to a negligible factor. Black History Month isn't just about looking back. It's about reclaiming and telling our truth. Nina Simone's voice cut through, her voice melodic yet piercing. "Well, what Black people need to do," she said, mimicking the condescending tone of those who dismiss our struggles, "is something that we've already done again and again. We've built, we've created, we've excelled, only to face racism that threatens to tear it all down. Sometimes racism does tear it down." Her fingers were still on the table. "They destroyed Black Wall Street, Rosewood, and other Black communities. They destroyed the Black Panther Party. They killed many of our leaders. But they didn't destroy us. We're still here." Langston Hughes smiled gently. "A dream deferred," he murmured, "but never forgotten." I felt a surge of determination rise within me. You're right. Black people have never had a level playing field in America. But we've done great things anyway, and we are still here, making history every day. Ida B. Wells leaned closer, her eyes sharp. "And what are you going to do about teaching our history?" I took a deep breath, kind of taken aback. "I'm going to tell your stories. In fact, they are our stories. I'm going to make sure the truth comes out, that it's remembered and honored, because Black history is more than a month. It's our legacy, it's our power, and it's our future." Dr. Woodson's face softened, but his voice remained resolute. "Then you do understand. Black History Month is just a tool. Use it to open doors, to inspire, and to teach. The struggle continues, but so does the triumph. Keep the flame burning." The table grew quiet for a moment, the weight of their presence filling the room. Then, one by one, they turned back to their work, writing, sketching, thinking, creating. And as I looked around, I knew that their stories were not just a part of history. They were a call to action, a reminder that we have to carry their legacy forward. I woke up with their voices still echoing in my mind. Black History Month, I realize, isn't just about honoring the past. It's about ensuring the present and the future. A present and a future where we control the narrative, celebrate the truth, and continue to make history every single day. Do you know what time it is? It is now time for our breather break. This is a moment to step back, to take a breath, and to simply be present. A time to let everything settle and to honor the space we've created together. When things feel intense for me, I like to breathe, to slow down, to center myself. Perhaps you want to do a libation, to do push-ups, but do whatever speaks to your soul. So let's take this moment together. I will return in 1 minute. Aquaba, welcome back to Espresso Talk today. I'm Amma Robin, and I want to take you a little behind the scenes of how a seat at the table came to be. This story was born from a lifelong dream of mine, a dream of meeting some of the great figures of history. There are so many people that I've wanted to sit down with, ask them questions, hear their ideas, listen to their struggles and their triumphs. And most of all, for me, to get their thoughts on what Black people and communities can do now. I've always imagined what it would be like to share space with them, to have a real conversation, and to get their wisdoms firsthand. Even beyond those who I included in the story, there are so many more figures I would love to meet at the table with, or even sit down and have an espresso with. I think of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Thurgood Marshall, Mary McLeod Bethune, Ella Baker, Kwame Ture, Booker T. Washington. I could go on forever. But each of them holds a unique place in history, and each of them has something to teach. Me, and maybe all of us. Some of them can seem intimidating. I'm not going to lie about that. But others seem warm and welcoming. But I know all of them would have something really important to offer. I've read, if you listen to my podcast, you know that I'm a big reader. I love to read. And I've read and studied so much about many of these people that I feel prepared to have a meaningful discussion with them. I know many of their responses already to the questions I would ask. And I know their philosophies and their visions and their fears. Of course, there's always more to learn. I know their struggles, and I know the world that they fought against. In many ways, reading their writings and hearing their speeches already feels like I've met them. It feels like they're answering my questions across time. And this is why reading is so important to me. It allows me to step into their world, to hear their voices, and to engage with their ideas. But it also honors them and their work, because they wrote not just for their time, but for ours, for those who would come after them, seeking guidance, seeking wisdom, and truth. Truth, I know, was so important. So when I wrote A Seat at the Table, I wanted to encourage my audience to think about who they would invite to their own table. Who would they want to meet? Who would they want to ask questions to? Who would you challenge? Who would you challenge to guide you or to inspire you? These are questions that deepen our understanding of history and our connection to it. And then, of course, there's the story of the young boy who had never heard of any Black inventors. That was not fiction, that's a true story. That was a real conversation I had with a young Black student. He was 12 years old, a really nice kid. He went to what people called a quote-unquote good school, and yet he had never heard about Black inventors. Not in school, not in books, not even at home. He'd never heard of them, never read about them, never been told that Black people have contributed in science and technology and innovation. And when I told him about Garrett Morgan and Lewis Latimer and Madam C.J. Walker and some others, his face really did change. I could see the shift, the pride, the amazement, the recognition of something he had never been given before, possibility. But What struck me even more, too, was that his white friends didn't believe him. His black friends didn't believe him either, because they had never heard of any black inventors. And this is one of the greatest dangers I think we face. When our contributions are erased and when our history is hidden, we internalize the idea that we've done nothing, accomplished nothing, and contributed nothing. And this was the very process that Dr. Carter G. Woodson warned us about. I call it inferiorization. You may have heard me use that term before. But Dr. Woodson knew that if black children did not learn their own history, they would see themselves as small and insignificant. He knew that erasing black history wasn't just an act of exclusion, it was an act of destruction. As he said in his book, Miseducation of the Negro, if a race has no history, it has no worthwhile tradition. It becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated. Let that sink in. It stands in danger of being exterminated. I used that term, negligible factor. Several of the other people at the table in the story used that term because it was so accurate. I didn't give the full quote within the story. That's why I think it's important to read it now, that it stands in danger of being exterminated. And we cannot let that happen. We have to know our history. We have to claim our legacy, and we have to remember and honor those who came before us, not just for the sake of the past, though that's important, but not only for that, but also for the survival of our future. And as much as I dream of meeting these great historical figures, I also recognize that greatness is not just in the past. There are so many black people today who are living, working, and making history in real time. There are leaders, artists, thinkers, and activists shaping the world right now. We don't have to look only to history to find brilliance. We can find it in our own communities today, and we can find it in our own families. We can find it in ourselves. So as I close this part, this reflection, I just want to ask you, who is making history today? Who is doing the work? Who is walking the walk? Who's shaping the future? And more importantly, how can you support them? How can you learn from them? How can you have a seat at the table with them? And perhaps you are them. Black history isn't just something to read about. It's something that we live, and it's something we create every single day. Let's not just look back. Let's look around. Let's look ahead. And let's honor our past by shaping our future. Asante Sana fam, I'll see you next time.